you see me? Can you hear me? I see there's a question from Trio Girl Mom saying, forgive me, but can someone please tell me what this case is regarding? So it's regarding a murder, the murder of a 25-year-old elite cyclist. Her name is Mo Wilson. It's kind of a love triangle scenario where some people say that she wasn't in a relationship with Colin Strickland. He's also an elite athlete, an elite cyclist, sponsored by Red Bull, Specialized, Rafa, the Meteor Bicycle Shop, and so on. All of those sponsors have since abandoned Colin Strickland, with the exception of Red Bull. And so, hi Bria, good to see you here. Sharon as well, good to see you. Ramblin' Rome. So this case is basically kind of explicitly a love triangle case. It's not similar to the Chris Watts case in terms of, I suppose it is similar in a sense, except here you had two women that I think liked Colin Strickland. And so I guess in a sense it was similar, but in this case, you have a woman who appeared to I'm not sure if is it allegedly or whatever, but the authorities are looking for her on suspicion of murdering 25-year-old Mo Wilson. Her name is Kaitlin Armstrong. Kaitlin is 34 years old, and in fact, her date of birth is a reason why she's actually on the run, possibly, meaning if they got her birth date right on the sort of arrest papers, the warrant papers, then she probably would have been held an extra day at least. But because they got that wrong, they had to release her and then found out that they'd made a discrepancy with her birth date, her date of birth. And so because of that error, she was released, and the crime took place on the 11th. It's now 17 days later. And what we know is that she left Austin. She flew from Austin to New York, and we haven't seen her since. We've seen CCTV footage of her at the airport. We also saw CCTV footage of her vehicle, a Jeep Grand Cherokee 2012, driving past the residence where Mo was killed at that night, kind of thing. SM Kobolinsky, thank you very much. Thanks for your hard work and time spent on this case. Thank you very much for passing on a lot of information. Sometimes I don't get round to it, on my own. So thank you for alerting me regularly. There's also Hey Jealousy's been a member for 3 months. So it's good to see you. Jean Karras is here. I think Stephanie is having dinner with her family, so probably won't see her. Thanks, Trio Girl. If you've got any more questions about what it's about, let me know. Colin Strickland, he's sort of at the center of this. He's 35 years old. He's a top elite gravel rider, which is kind of a new sport. It's kind of, if you imagine someone on a racing bike riding on dirt roads. So it's kind of like, almost like the hybrid between road racing on tar roads and mountain biking on dirt roads. Gravel road riding is like riding almost like a racing bike. It's just got slightly fatter tires on reasonably firm dirt roads. Sometimes they might be muddy dirt roads. So it's, I guess, in a way tougher than road cycling and I guess more technical. So I hope that answers your question. Are there any sports folks in chat? Is there anyone here who cycles, who knows sport, who perhaps knows these people? In places like the Netherlands and in Europe, there is, what do they call it? I'm not sure if they call it cross-country cycling, but it's similar. It's sort of folks on sports people on these racing bikes, and they sort of ride through mud and dirt, and they pick up their bikes and they sort of run. Just kind of a more, I guess, fun but hardcore version of road cycling kind of thing. Tax cut says rally racing for bikes. Okay. So I just want to give you guys a little bit of recent news. I wasn't really sure what to call. Raul Thomas says Colin apparently rides one gear, no brakes racing too. Okay. So I'm kind of I'm not sure if I can still call myself a sportsman. I've just been working so much that I'm, not quite the man that I used to be, but I have done the Ironman, and I'm actually wearing a little Ironman, what do you call it? Hoodie. I've got state colors, that's in my country, in triathlon, biathlon, swimming, football, and I try to get it in cycling, but it was sort of a technical issue. Anyway, I never got it in cycling. But a couple of months ago, I went on a mountain bike 3-day event, and the guy that presented it was riding it like a gravel rider. So he was riding on a gravel bike. So it's not a mountain bike, it's not a racing bike, it's sort of a hybrid. It's got thicker tires, but it's very similar to a racing bike with kind of thicker tires. And so he was riding it as a gravel rider. And I actually fell during that event, broke my 5th rib pretty badly. LA Vibe says no relation to Lance Armstrong, definitely not. Interestingly, Lance Armstrong has not so far mentioned. Lance Armstrong lives in Texas, lives in Austin. This incident happened in Austin, in the suburbs of Austin, and he hasn't really mentioned anything. Probably because it's just not. It's kind of negative. The whole thing is negative. It's a negative association with his name. It's a negative association with sport. It's just not kind of a good news story. But he did actually talk about the Texas shooting, which is quite interesting. So LA Vibes, are you in Austin? That's interesting. So LA Vibes is in Austin. In Austin, okay. Bria says, at first I thought there was a relation to Lance Armstrong as well. No. So we're going to go into Kaitlin Armstrong's backstory. I just want to give you guys a little bit of news update. So the one news update, I wasn't really sure what to call this story because there's some interesting things. But one of the news updates is that Kaitlin Armstrong, who's currently a fugitive, she's currently on the lam. She was previously charged with larceny after not paying for $650 in terms of a Botox procedure. If you can believe that. And it's not as though she doesn't have money. She's actually pretty wealthy, which we're going to get to in a moment. The other thing that's happened fairly recently, I would say in the last maybe 24 hours, is the manhunt for this woman has now gone international, right? There's reason to believe that she's crossed the border and that she's no longer in America. A federal warrant has been issued for, quote, unlawful flight to avoid prosecution. And this means that federal agents, I guess that means the FBI, are now part of the search, not just the U.S. Marshals, it's also the FBI. I just want to quote, before I get down to brass tacks, I want to quote Deputy U.S. Marshal Brandon Fuller. He's basically saying that why he thinks, it's a marshal saying why he thinks it's looking like Kaitlin has crossed the border. You must bear in mind, she had 3 full days in which to use her passport, right? So she had 3 full days to go to airports and catch flights and not be held up, and at that point. I think she left Austin on May 14, and the arrest warrant was only issued on the 17th. So she had 3 full days to get the hell out of Dodge, right? So Deputy U.S. Marshal Brandon Fuller said the following, quote, "Could she go into another country? Absolutely. You've got to remember that the time she traveled, based on the evidence that has been shown so far, she was not wanted at the time." So when she got in the plane, so when she caught the flight to New York via Dallas, right? She flew from Austin to Dallas to New York. She wasn't wanted at the time. And so he says she could have used her passport and she could have said, "You know what, I'm going on vacation, see ya." Those are his words. And then he said she could have gone anywhere. She could have gone to Canada. So that is definitely possible. If she did fly somewhere, like to Canada or wherever, then I would imagine that it would just be a matter of time to feed her name through like the airline database and say, well, is there Kaitlin Armstrong, on a flight manifest? And so if her name doesn't come up, then that would exclude her from flying somewhere. But I suppose she could have gone on some alternative way of crossing the border, such as on a train, I guess. I'm more familiar with Europe than I am with America. I don't know if you can cross the border from America into Canada by train or by boat. I'm not quite sure what the options are, but I would imagine there's certain options where you don't necessarily put your name on like a flight manifest, you just buy a ticket. It's sort of a bit more anonymous. That's certainly the case with travel in Europe, although cross-border, I'm not 100% sure. I still think there is a certain amount of passport control. I know when I caught a train from, I think it was Madrid into France, I had to go through like a passport thing, as far as I can remember. So the other thing that I think seems to show that her intention, like where she's likely headed, was, Donna says train, yes, for Canada, is if you think about where she was kind of in kind of quite a southerly part of America, right? Austin, Texas is quite far down south in America. And she got herself very quickly very far north and slightly east, right? And so where is she trying to go? Well, she's gone already a big distance north, right? I don't know if you can fly much further north than New York from Austin if you wanted to and still stay in America. The other thing that's maybe debatable is if she really wanted to go overseas, could she not have flown from Austin, because there's an international airport, I think, in Austin. Could she not have just flown somewhere internationally from there? I do think it's quite clear that she's not going to Mexico. If she wanted to go to Mexico, she probably would have gone south, right? The other thing that I think is really important to stress here is we're not dealing with Vicky White. We're not dealing with Casey White. We're dealing with someone who's pretty well educated, someone with a lot of means. She's got her own money, and she had something like a 3-hour head start. So we're dealing with someone who's no slouch, and probably someone who's got every incentive to, because bear in mind, if she's captured, then it's like, well, you're under arrest, you're going back home, and you're going to be possibly charged, possibly tried for murder. And if you're convicted, you lose your freedom, spend the rest of your life in jail, right, in prison. So she's kind of got every incentive to try and not be caught. And one would imagine she will try and cut her hair as soon as possible because she's got very long hair. You can see it in the CCTV footage. It's very long and it's sort of wavy and it's sort of unusually light brown sort of color. So if she dyes her hair dark and cuts her hair, I don't think it would be very easy to recognize her going forward. That's very different to the Vicky and Casey White situation where they're two people, the one dude's really tall and it's really going to be easy to see them. She's also not traveling by car, so it's not like they can look out for a vehicle or a license plate. That's not on the cards at all at this point. Austin to Toronto. So maybe she didn't know. Maybe she thought, well, can I just go through? Maybe she thought I'll fly to New York because that'll be quicker and easier. I don't know. Maybe there weren't flights available to Toronto. Who knows? But anyway, the point is the manhunt has now gone international, and so the question really is, are they going to find her? How long is it going to take to find her? And if they do, where are they going to find her? The other possibility is, could she go to something like not a developed country? Could she go to Indonesia? Could she go to India or Nepal or somewhere in Asia like Japan or something like that? Because one would imagine if she goes far enough, if she goes, for example, to a country that's not an English-speaking country, you can almost imagine that the news of what's happened to her may not reach there, or even if it does, people aren't really going to care, kind of thing. It's sort of like, do you know what I mean? If if a crime has happened somewhere else in the world and someone says, well, look out for this person, you're kind of going to shrug your shoulders, right? Someone else says Dubai. Nepal is a big yoga destination. The problem with being a foreigner in a foreign country is that you tend to stick out. So a Westerner in a foreign country is probably going to stick out. But the positive side of it is, if you're the fugitive, is there's going to be less law enforcement that is looking for you compared to if you're hanging around either in America or Canada. Nepal is a non-extradition country. Okay. So the other thing that I think is quite pertinent is the authorities are actually appealing to the public, which means you can kind of assume that they out of leads. They are, if they're relying on the public, if they're appealing to the public for information, it means they are kind of at a dead end, right? And so we'll see what happens. I think you want to look at on her passport countries she's traveled to in the past. And one of the countries she has traveled to in the past is Iceland. I don't know. I think it's an interesting question. Is Iceland part of the European Union? It might sound like a dumb thing to say, but you do have the Schengen visa, which gives you the ability to travel right through Europe. I'm not 100% sure if Iceland is part of the EU, but if it is, then she may have a Schengen visa based on when she traveled to Iceland. I just don't think she traveled there that recently, but that's just a hunch. But in terms of Colin Strickland social media, I did mean to do an analysis of that. There's pictures of him riding with a group on gravel bikes in Iceland, and she's there. So she might want to go to Iceland, for example. She's been there before, and that might be a place where she might feel, I know a little bit about what's going on here, kind of thing. GITS is not part of the EU. Okay, so that's not on. But she might still, if she has a visa for Iceland, she might be able to get back in. And so maybe that's something they could check. If you're the authorities, you might want to check that. Okay, so I think we're about up to speed on some of the latest news. Now I want to drill down into a little bit more of my speciality, which is the true crime side, the dynamic side, looking at the backstory of a person, more pertinently, looking at their identity, right? Trying to figure out who is this person. And that's not easy. You don't just snap your fingers and kind of quickly figure out who a person is. It takes time. Also, if someone doesn't want to know who you really are, and a lot of us have a public face, but our private face is very different. It takes a long time to figure out who are you really, what is your actual private face. And that's the work of true crime, to figure out what are your real intentions, what are your real motives, who is the real, for example, Johnny Depp, who is the real Amber Heard, right? That's sort of the main job in true crime. What's the real thing behind the whatever, smoke and mirrors? So we are in luck in a way, because someone has come forward, a guy called David. He hasn't given his surname. Well, someone else says Iceland is part of the EU. Okay. So I'm just not sure. It's like question mark. So I don't really know. I'm not really going to Google it, but I'm just saying that's a possibility. If she has a Schengen visa, she could go anywhere in Europe. So anyway, this guy, David, is a friend who's known Colin Strickland for 17 years. And he has come forward to talk about not only Colin, his friend, but also Colin's girlfriend. So now you're getting a real insight. Not EU, but Schengen. That's quite interesting. Paddy says Iceland isn't in the EU, but is part of the Schengen area. Okay, that's quite interesting. I've always wanted to go to Iceland, I must say. Timmy, can I put you down? Now that I have put him down, I think I'm going to have a sip of, this is warm hot chocolate. Well, it's hot chocolate that's become warm. Okay, so obviously David knows Colin Strickland, who's 35, pretty well. David is 7 years older than Colin, but he's known him for 17 years, so he obviously knows Colin pretty well. And so he has come forward, and this is his take on this whole situation, right? And this is an alternative title for this whole video, this whole live stream. This is what David said. He said, with this girl, it's a reference to Kaitlin. He said, with this girl, there was not one red flag, not one. No rage, drama, nothing. Nothing showed over the last year, and that tells me that there's something buried so deep that Mo being in town lit the wick to everything that was suppressed prior to that, right? Now, he's already revealed a critical flaw in what he said there through his own statement. See if you can spot it. I'll read it again. He says, with this girl, there was not one red flag, not one. No rage, drama, nothing. Nothing showed over the last year, and that tells me that there's something buried so deep that Mo being in town, that's in Austin, lit the wick to everything that was suppressed prior to that. Now, Kaitlin and Colin lived together in Austin. Mo was in Austin to do a race. I'm not actually 100% sure if the race was in Austin or if it was somewhere else in Texas. But there was a race that was coming up, and Mo's not from Austin, right? So David also says, quote, it's just so disturbing. I can't imagine what Mo's family are going through because their daughter just caught in the middle, the wrong place at the wrong time with a crazy person. And then the Wilson's family, Mo's family said, and they've kind of, I think, said this a couple of times, that they don't believe Mo was in a relationship at the time of her death. So they're saying there was no love triangle. I guess that Colin and Mo were just friends. But what's important to bear in mind is whether or not that's true, Mo did previously have a relationship with Colin, and Kaitlin knew about it, right? I just want to say that, and I'm reading from a script here that I wrote earlier today, that this whole thing is a regular theme in true crime. This idea that someone did something randomly and that there's simply no relationship, there's no explanation, there's no connection, there's no dynamic, there's no operative psychology that links these people to what they've done. There's no dynamic. In other words, there's no explanation. It's just sort of shrug. Something happened and nobody could see it coming, and it just doesn't make any sense. But this is simply wrong. And it happens over and over in true crime. And it just simply isn't true. There is an operative psychology. Perhaps it's just a case that you don't know what it is. There is a connection, but just because you can't see it doesn't mean it's not there. I think what Mo's family says echoes what David says, right? In other words, that the whole thing that we just don't know why this happened. It just doesn't make any sense. But it's actually not about what they know or what they believe or what we know, what we believe. It's what Kaitlin knew and believed. Did Kaitlin think that Mo was having a relationship or wanting to have a relationship? Did Kaitlin suspect that her boyfriend wanted or was having a relationship? That's the critical question, right? And obviously, Kaitlin thought there was a relationship. That's the critical thing. That's the important thing is, what did Kaitlin think? Well, Kaitlin thought what she thought, and then she took drastic action because of what she thought. And I think it's difficult to, and I'm just giving my own personal opinion, I think it's difficult to give a totally innocent explanation for someone else's boyfriend going swimming with an ex, swimming, not cycling, not some kind of business meeting, but swimming. What happens when you go swimming? You take your clothes off. What happens when you go swimming? You are I'm talking about not training swimming, but play swimming. It's kind of a fun encounter, right? And Colin has sort of said that, he wanted to stay friends with Mo because he was arranging sponsors for her. Swimming and then dinner. I don't think you're going to be arranging sponsors while swimming. You know what I mean? So that's definitely kind of at a level of casualness and familiarity that's beyond we two professional athletes and let's talk business, right? You know what I mean? They don't meet at a bicycle shop. They don't meet for coffee. They meet somewhere where they can take their clothes off and jump in the water and who knows what. One thing I would have liked to have seen is whether Mo did a training session. So she's on Strava. One of the things that she does, I guess, is swim. And it's possible if they were both athletes that they may have swum together, as in trained. It's possible. I don't know. And I could imagine that if they were both very serious athletes, that maybe they thought of doing a training session together, but the time of the training session is also a little bit weird. It's kind of a public pool. I don't know if there are lanes in the pool. I don't know if Colin ever went there sort of regularly to train. I don't know. If he did, maybe it's a bit different. It just feels like it was not for business. It was for something else. That's what it seems like. And so one of the key questions is, when did Kaitlin kind of realize Colin's not where he should be, right? When did she kind of realize he's cheating, basically? At what point in that day? Remember, he came home kind of late, at like 8:30 at night kind of thing. So anyway, the point I'm trying to make is Kaitlin thought there was a relationship. That is what is important. And there's quite a clear reason why she would think there was, because of what had happened in the past. She'd had a direct encounter with Mo. She'd communicated directly with her, and she'd also, it was also a situation that Colin broke up with her and then was in a relationship with Mo, and then broke up with Mo and was back in a relationship with her. So it was literally, she's at my expense. And that's possibly what Mo thought as well. It's either her or me kind of thing. And if you take that to, in sport, sometimes there's this all or nothing approach. You have to win, there's no coming second, and it's all or nothing. And if you take that approach to love and you say, I can't come second in this, if I'm this person's friend and not their girlfriend, then it's nothing. So I've got to have it all. I've got to make sure at all costs that I win this, that I get this, right? But I just want to come back to what I refer to as simplistic and reductionist, or also a kind of atomizing kind of thinking that I think is really symptomatic of our society. It's this kind of superficial and fragmented way of thinking, where you say, I can't think of anything I can't think of a red flag, so I guess there isn't a red flag. Thanks a lot, hey, jealousy. I can't think of anything, so nothing comes to mind. So is there anything? It just there is no explanation. It doesn't make sense. It does make sense, and you've got to figure that part out. It's quite interesting, this idea of atomized kind of thinking, which is something that fragments and breaks down, and also the fact that crime atomizes society. Crime breaks society down. And just on the scale of this particular crime, you had a connection that's like a triangle where three people are connected to one another. Basically, Colin connected to Kaitlin and Colin connected to Mo. But there's also an indirect connection between Kaitlin and Mo. It's like, I know you're my rival. So there is a connection there as well. But nevertheless, there's this triangle that's going on. And then when Kaitlin, if Kaitlin is the perpetrator here, then the next moment you've literally got three lives that are totally broken. In terms of that as a very small subset of society, that triangle of relationship has just been totally destroyed. Colin right now is on the run as well. I don't know if I mentioned that. Colin has gone underground. I don't know if he's training. I doubt it. So Colin is on the run. Mo has died, unfortunately and tragically. And Kaitlin is also on the run. But these three lives have basically been permanently altered. And that is what a crime does. It atomizes society. Does that make sense? So in this case, one foolish act and three lives have been permanently broken into pieces, some more permanently than others. And that's the one side of crime, that it breaks things down. But true crime also offers us, certainly the way that I approach it. I've written quite a few books on true crime, and I try not to sort of deal with true crime in a gratuitous or sensationalist way, or to try and be popular. I try and do it in a way that is authentic and in a way that we learn something about ourselves and about human nature and about how the world works. It's not simply voyeurism, right? So true crime also offers us the opportunity to synthesize our connections to one another and this world, in terms of where you look at this and you say, this happened because connections were under threat. And what you're doing is you recognizing and realizing what those connections were, not imagining that they didn't exist or underestimating them, right? Unfortunately, introspection isn't our society's strong point. So I can see how a man can look at Kaitlin and say, I don't understand why she did this. She was such a great girl. But what you're not seeing as a man is she's a 34-year-old woman, and she's not a elite cyclist, and her boyfriend is. And her boyfriend has in the past been attracted to this other elite cyclist, and in a sense they make a great pair. And Kaitlin has wanted to train with her boyfriend and other things, and he feels, well, you're holding me back and you're not good enough. So she feels inadequate, and she wants to be good enough. She's putting in an effort to think about it. Her boyfriend's like this world-class rider. She's not world-class, but she just kind of wants to be his companion. She wants to try and keep up, but it's asking quite a lot, right? And so think about just how threatened she would feel by the fact that she knows he's attracted to this much younger rider who can keep up with him and who he has a lot more in common with. And so it's like she must feel helpless and powerless in terms of, how do I compete with that, right? And that feeling of helplessness and powerlessness, what's the answer to that? How do you fix that? How do you regain power? How do you regain control? So that's, I think, the part of David's puzzle that's missing, is seeing that perspective from being in her shoes, kind of thing. But there's quite an easy clue for why David is missing that. And this isn't to cast stones at David. There's other things he says that rings true. And I'm sure he knows a lot about Colin, a dude 7 years younger than him. David's 42 years old. And he's known him for almost 20 years. But the easy clue is that he's only known Kaitlin for 1 year. He's known Colin for 17 years. He's only known Kaitlin for 1 year. And obviously he doesn't know enough about her. What we're going to find out is he knows quite a lot, but certainly not enough to know what the real dynamics were. I just want to read Bria's comment. Bria, if there's anyone new here, Bria's in France. Debbie says, all of that makes sense up until the murder. Bria says, also Mo has been with Colin in the past and has other relationships as well. The fact that she can just slide in and get Colin anytime she wants. I think that drove Kaitlin. Yeah. Okay, so now we're going to start kind of really drilling into it. The other thing which folks in the true crime community are more than familiar with is the notion that all people have got two faces. So whether you think you know someone or not, someone always has a side to them that they keep private. And you might think that, oh, so we shouldn't do that. We shouldn't keep a side to us private. No, you should. There's a side to us that needs to be private and personal. For example, to some extent, your, I don't want to make it sound like it's deviancy, but let's say your sexual behavior, not everyone needs to see that. If you have a particular experience with your lover, it doesn't need to be live streamed while you're in the nude. Do you know what I'm saying? That needs to be private, and it's good and healthy that that's private. Does that make sense? So we're not saying it's wrong to be private about certain things, right? It is wrong to have a lot of secrets, because if you're keeping secrets, it probably means you're doing something that society wouldn't approve of, and maybe society is right not to approve of it. In any event, all people have got two faces, a public persona and a public mask. A public persona and a public mask. And then underneath, there's a different person, a private identity underneath that's harder to know. That's true of everybody. But in a criminal, this two-faced thing is particularly evident and is particularly problematic, because the problem is the private person may have started going down a road that's really not very good. They may have had certain fantasies, they may have had certain, but fantasies in a bad sense, and then the difference between the public face of a criminal and the private face is very great. It's not like in order for there to be some continuity, there must be something that's authentic between your public face and your private face. Otherwise, something's going to go wrong somewhere, something's going to fall apart somewhere. You can't have this total Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde thing, otherwise it's going to blow up. There's got to be some continuity, right? So when you have, with a criminal, this difference between the public and the private that is so great, the schism is so big, you have what I call a radical dichotomy, right? And if you think about the word dichotomy, the opposite of dichotomy is similarity, likeness, sameness, agreement, harmony. So although you can have a public face and a private face, there should still be a certain degree of harmony and agreement between both faces. It's when there's disharmony and disagreement and conflict and discord, and the two faces are almost at odds with one another, that one of them is sort of a fraud, a fake. Do you get what I'm saying? So part of the clue is how much effort. So if you want to ask the question, could there be a problem in terms of this dichotomy? And then you can ask this question about your own life, you can ask it about somebody else's life, but you particularly want to ask it about a criminal. You want to say, part of the clue that there's this radical dichotomy is how much effort goes into sculpting a perfect exterior. So one of the quick, easy ways to say, I think there could be a problem here, is you see that this particular person puts a heck of a lot of effort into the persona of I'm a nice guy or I'm a nice girl. I'm perfect. I'm sweet. I never lose my temper. Everything about me, I'm a golden girl or I'm a golden boy, right? So the extent to which this exterior is either curated online or it's curated offline, but all this effort that's gone into creating this idea of this wonderful person that never does anything wrong and is always sweet and kind, that often means that is a really big mask covering up something completely different. If you aren't putting so much effort into this exterior and it's not this perfect exterior, then it's probably a kind of an authentic person. You're dealing with a real person. But if there's this big effort to dress up the monster underneath, then there probably is a monster underneath. So think about this thing of rendering this idea of also being a fairy tale nice person on the outside. It's almost like the message you're communicating to someone else or the outside world is, I'm a fairy tale. I'm kind of like too good to be true. There are no problems with me. I'm just one shining princess or prince. I'm flawless. I'm no issues, right? And you might think that. What did I write here? The continuity between the two faces seems extreme and unexpected. And it may be to us, but that's simply because we don't know these people very well. So to the person committing the crime, the two faces aren't incompatible. To the person who's living inside this deception, where the one side is sweet and kind and the other side is prickly and nasty, for them, that's not incompatible. It's completely familiar, right? And they are just going within their own backstory loops and their own habitual behavior, their own patterns. I'm going to deal with what David says in a moment. I just want to deal with one more paragraph here. The other aspect I want to comment on is the notion of Colin going underground or off the radar. So when we were speaking about this on Patreon, a lot of people said, I just don't understand why he's disappearing. Did he do something wrong? Is he in cahoots? I just don't understand it. And some people are sort of, suspecting a conspiracy. And I think there's a perfectly reasonable explanation for that. there's a perfectly reasonable explanation for why he's left home and he's sort of disappeared, right? So we're going to deal with that. Keep that question in the back of your minds, and we're going to deal with why he's gone on the run. And it's not as mysterious as what a lot of people think. So let's start with David's understanding of Kaitlin, and we'll see what's missing from the puzzle. This is quoting from, I think it's quoting from the Daily Mail, but it was sort of republished in a couple of websites. David worked at Wheelhouse Mobile, which is, I guess, they build these sort of caravans. And, it's like camper vans or whatever. And then anyway, seems to be building these things. And you actually see a couple of photos of this trailer. It's quite a slick silver trailer with a beautiful interior on Colin's social media. So if you're not sure what I'm talking about, just go and check it out there. And so David works there. He builds these trailers, and it's a business. It's a vintage trailer refurbishment business owned by Strickland and Armstrong. So they're the co-owners of this business. And according to David, Kaitlin was our accounts payable manager. Bear in mind, she's got like degrees in and experience in finance. And so she was the accounts payable manager for the business. She set up the website, did that sort of thing. And then, according to David, she did nothing to do with building anything in terms of these trailers or design. He said David did that. That was his job. So I kind of get the idea that David was Colin's friend, but also David was working for them, building these trailers, refurbishing them. And so David says the following: before the murder, the person I knew, and he's talking here about Kaitlin, was a really sweet and nice human that was trying to make her dream in this world, whatever that was. Let me read that again. These are David's words, talking about kind of in a way his boss, Kaitlin, who's the girlfriend of a really good friend of his, who's also his boss. So he says, before the murder, that's the murder of Mo Wilson, the person I knew, meaning the person I thought that I knew, Kaitlin, was a really sweet and nice human that was trying to make a dream in this world, whatever that was. And he doesn't use the word really sweet for nothing. He doesn't say really for nothing. He also doesn't say the person I knew was a nice person. He really emphasizes that she was really sweet and really nice, and goes on to say she was just trying to make her dream in the world, whatever that was. Now, again, as someone in true crime, I've kind of got to say, are murderers only sour, unkind, obviously bad people like we see in the movies? Or are criminals like obviously bad? You look at them, you bad and you're a criminal. So if someone looks like they're a good person, they just can't be a criminal because criminals look bad. But I mean, that is how we indoctrinated in the movies. In the movies, the bad guy looks sort of ugly. Because I'm bald, I really often notice bad guys in movies are bald guys. Bad guys also often have like scars on their faces, and they wear black, and they, whatever, right? But the point is, the bad guy is like obvious. But in the real world, the bad guy isn't obvious. The bad guy could be you. The bad guy could be the person closest to you. The bad guy could actually be anybody. So are nice people by default not capable of murder? If we look at some of the recent cases we've covered, Chris Watts was described, certainly in the beginning, when nobody knew him, in exactly the same way. A nice guy, a golden boy, a good colleague, the perfect father, and the perfect husband. In fact, a book was written about Chris Watts called The Perfect Father, and then the word perfect was like scratched out in like a thin red line, right? So Chris Watts appeared to everyone to be the perfect father, and he ended up being far from that. he appeared perfect, but he wasn't, was he? That same fairy tale of perfection we see across the spectrum in true crime. We see it with the Ramseys, the McCanns, Scott Peterson, Amanda Knox, and more recently the Morphews. Often in documentary after documentary, the documentary starts off with the same tired but nevertheless somewhat true opening, that there was this fairy tale couple, or they were this all-American couple living this all-American life, and things were basically just ideal. And so how did things turn into this nightmare? But invariably it starts off as everything is wonderful. And a lot of the people at the center of these cases will say the same thing. Everything was perfect. Everything was wonderful. And then something happened. I don't know what it was. I still don't know. So you have this myth of, I'm living a perfect life in a perfectly ideal fairy tale, and then tragedy unexpectedly struck. And I've always got to say, because I deal with this writing books about it, it's like, really? You didn't know that things were heading a certain way? There weren't any clues, there weren't any red flags? Because that's what David's saying. He's saying there wasn't any red flags. And so maybe I'm cynical, but I'm like, really? Not a single red flag? Nothing? And so, I've got to sort of counter that and say, tragedy didn't strike kind of predictably or inevitably. And even when you read the affidavit of this kind of love triangle situation, and you read about the on-again, off-again relationship, you read about all the other stuff, and then you read that he buys these two guns, you can kind of feel the whole thing inevitably, inexorably heading towards its denouement. Do you know what I mean? You can feel that it's heading to something. All these forces are driving in a particular way, right? Anyway, so David says, Kaitlin always had goals she was after, and she just always kept busy. No red flags for anything that would result in an outcome like this that we were aware of, right? Let me read that again. David says, Kaitlin always had goals she was after. So she's a ambitious person. She's a focused person. She's a disciplined person. You would expect that with someone who is the partner to a world-class cyclist, a world-class athlete. You'd expect that he would want to be with someone who is disciplined and focused and all those kinds of things. A friend of mine who died in October was maybe not world class, but he was a very, very good cyclist himself. He came third in South Africa last year in his age group. So he was, very, a really, really strong rider. And the most focused person that I know, the most consistent person that I know, the person with the most balanced life I've ever met. He could balance family and work, and is very successful, and sport. And he was a success in all three of them. Great father, great family man, excellent. He was a really, really good businessman, very, very successful, very, very successful, and an excellent athlete. And he managed to do all three of them really, really, really well. Now, I used to say to him, I can do one of those at a time. I can be really good at sport. I can be really good at my work. I can be a really good boyfriend or a really attentive boyfriend. I don't know if I can do all three at the same time at a high level like that. How do you do it? But I think part of the answer is that his wife is also very focused. His wife also trains as well and allows him. So she delegates, he does certain things, he does certain things, right? You know what I mean? They share what needs to be done in terms of the house. there's not a bickering thing. It's not like, yes, but you did that. They've found a way where the whole system works very well, and she does what she needs to do, and he does what he needs to do, and it all fits together in a very well-oiled machine, right? But that is contingent on him being disciplined and training early in the morning, right? Every morning he must get up before everyone else gets up and train, so that it's not like he's taking time away from them. And then everyone's kind of got their role, and everyone sort of does it, and so in that sense, that definitely works. So I'm not surprised that Kaitlin had goals, but you must really be aware of this particular person. I think it's going to be much harder to catch than a lot of the people out there, because she's got self-discipline, she's got a lot of resources, she doesn't have to rob a bank or whatever, she's got her own money that she can draw on, and she's university educated, and she's already got a huge head start. So I think the authorities have got their work cut out. This is not going to be chasing Casey White by any means. And it's already been something like 4 days. This fugitive status is many days now longer than Vicky White and Casey White. Look how many leads they had with them. They had this car and that car and this sighting. And with Kaitlin, there's nothing like that. But this is the part that I want to address is David says she had these goals, she always kept busy, no red flags, and then said there wasn't anything that would result in an outcome like this that we were aware of. Well, that's the crucial thing. You weren't aware of it. There were red flags, you just weren't aware of it. So what were the red flags? Well, the red flags aren't this big mystery. In a scenario where someone is cheating on somebody else, so in a love triangle scenario, the red flags are absolutely predictable. It's the same thing you get in the Chris Watts case. Looking on someone else's phone, hiding phone numbers, exactly the same thing, And I think one can also go to the Morphew case and say, were things quite different there? Were people hiding their interactions there as well? What do you think? Anyway, so for this is from the affidavit. What are the things we not aware of, or more particularly, what was David not aware of, right? This is from the affidavit. On May 13, 2022, Detective Spittler contacted Wilson's friend, who was fully identified in the Austin Police Department report and referred to by the pseudonym Jane. So we still don't know who Jane is. So David's come forward. We don't know who Jane is, except that Jane is not her real name, and Jane knew Mo. And Jane said that she will provide information on condition that she will remain anonymous. I think that was a clever step. And she also doesn't want to be targeted by Armstrong. So even Jane was like, keep me anonymous because I don't want Kaitlin to come after me, right? So the fact that Colin and Jane are scared that Kaitlin's going to come after them shows you that maybe they know something about her that other people don't. Does she get her payback? Does she not forget something? Does she hold a grudge? All those kind of things. Is she really determined? What happens if you cross her? What has happened to other people who cross her? Anyway, so Jane provided this information, and she said that Mo Wilson and Colin Strickland had multiple romantic relationships. Multiple. That's not just one, right? I think Colin Strickland said, we just got together in October. Jane said, no, they had multiple romantic relationships, and it was on again, off again. Jane said that Wilson's and Strickland's romantic relationship started during Wilson's first trip to Austin. That's really critical, because that's not, you might say, oh, so it happened during the first trip to Austin. Well, you've got to think, what did Kaitlin think about that? If Kaitlin knew about that, what did she think about that? And how would Kaitlin feel if she knew Mo was coming into town? And Kaitlin knew Mo was coming into town because there was a race. Her boyfriend was also preparing for the same race. She would have known. So this relationship also happened not that long ago in the fall of 2021. Jane advised that Armstrong, that's Kaitlin, discovered Mo's number and contacted Mo several times. So she not only finds Mo's number, but she then acts on it and she phones Mo up and she says, and anyway, it creates enough unhappiness for Mo to actually block Kaitlin, right? Do you see a red flag there? Then Jane said that Wilson told her within the past 2 months, so within the past 2 months, that's April, May, that's really recently, within the past 2 months, Kaitlin started following Mo Wilson on Instagram. That's also a red flag. And what is not mentioned here, because I don't know if she knows this, but I think Kaitlin probably also followed Mo on Strava, which would be, at this time I'm going cycling and I'm going this route and this is where I am and now I'm here and all that kind of thing. And she would also look at who's giving, on Strava, when you like something, you give kudos, you say, well done on doing a workout. And so she would look at, is Colin giving Mo kudos when Mo does a workout? When Colin does a workout, does Mo give Colin kudos? That's also going to give an indication, is something still going on here? Then Jane advised the last time Armstrong called Wilson, this is critical, the last time Kaitlin spoke to Mo on the phone, she told Mo that she was with Strickland. She told her, I'm with Colin and you need to stay away from him. So she basically warned her. The last conversation over the phone that Kaitlin had with Mo was to say, I'm with Colin, stay away from him. It was a warning, right? So did you guys catch the pertinent points here? In Mo and Colin's backstory, which is necessarily also Kaitlin's backstory, their relationship started, right? Their relationship started when Mo made her first trip to Austin. So that's going to put Kaitlin in vigilance mode. The last time this happened was when Mo came to Austin. Mo's coming to Austin now. Now is like a critical time. Now I really need to pay attention, right? And so guess what happens? Mo comes to Austin and guess what happens? Mo and Colin head off to the swimming pool. And so if you were jealously guarding your relationship, if this was you and you were like, I want to keep this person with me. If that was your mission, I'm trying to jealously guard this. I know someone's a threat out there. And also you knew that Mo was coming to town. You knew that was happening. And you knew that because your boyfriend was preparing for the same race, for the same event. Wouldn't you be on high alert? And so what happens? As I say, those suspicions prove to be absolutely well founded, and the two do secretly hook up again, except it's not so secret. Why was it not secret? Because effectively Kaitlin was on alert, and she was probably, in the same way you can take the surveillance on social media and say, well, that surveillance was going to be happening in the real world as well. She was, you know what I'm saying? But then there's more from the affidavit. This is in terms of red flags. We're trying to say, David says, I can't think of a single red flag. Well, look at all the red flags we're identifying. According to the affidavit, Wilson and Strickland had a romantic relationship before Strickland ultimately began dating Armstrong again. Strickland advised while he and Wilson were dating, Armstrong called, so this is Colin's version. while him and Mo were dating, Kaitlin called Wilson on the phone, telling Wilson she was the one who was dating Strickland. So even when ostensibly their relationship was over, Kaitlin was still trying to control the whole thing, trying to control the relationship, trying to get Colin back. So it's not just that she was jealous, she was also possessive. It's not just that she was jealous and possessive, she was also controlling. And Strickland told Detective Spittler that he has to change Wilson's name in his phone so Armstrong does not know who he's speaking to. So that's also aggravating the situation, is despite all of this that has happened, Strickland persists. Strickland continues to fraternize, to flirt, to engage, whatever. And so he changes Wilson's name on the phone. And this is because Kaitlin had taken his phone and actually blocked her number on his phone. That is the extent to which she's, you can say, interfered or taken charge, or she's like on high alert that something is going to happen. And wasn't she right? And so she's feeling helpless. She's trying to stop something from happening, and it's happening regardless. She can't stop it from happening. And you kind of got to ask, if she's trying so hard to keep them together, what is actually keeping them together? In other words, why is Colin with her, right? And equally, why was Colin so interested in Mo? And also, so if he liked Mo, why not just stay with Mo? So what is actually the dynamic that's going on here? Why is Kaitlin in some ways not right for him? But in another sense, why is Mo in some ways not right for him? And that's the important thing to ask. Then Strickland also says he had to delete text messages on his phone to prevent Armstrong from finding him. That obviously means he had to delete messages between Mo and himself because Armstrong would somehow find them. And so you kind of get the sense that she's crossing lines and crossing boundaries in terms of personal space. And she may feel, I'm totally justified because you shouldn't be cheating on me. And while that's true, you are kind of entitled to a certain amount of privacy, right? And she's saying, in terms of this, I can break all those rules. I can go onto your phone and see what you're doing if you're not going to tell me, right? And as soon as you start breaking those rules, where do you stop? As soon as you start passing certain boundaries, where do you stop, right? So while Strickland and Wilson were dating, Kaitlin interfered. She called Wilson. She confronted Wilson. You get the sense that she's not a shrinking violet. You get a sense of her personality, that she's confrontational. She's, as I say, possessive. She told Wilson she was the one dating Strickland and basically back off. She also crossed a line by, as I say, going onto Strickland's phone and blocking Mo on it. It's not surprising, just based on this, that Kaitlin was monitoring Mo on social media, following her on Instagram, and maintaining eagle-eyed surveillance, probably on Strava. Not only Colin's Strava, but Mo's as well. All of these are red flags. I just want to emphasize again for David to say, I didn't see a single red flag. There are quite a few fluttering. I don't know if you guys can see them. There's quite a few fluttering red flags already. Then this is what David says. He said, after it happened, meaning Mo's murder, Armstrong didn't do what most soap operas would have her do, which is go back home and kill the one thing you can't have, Strickland. It's dark. Those are his words. What do you guys think of that? What do you think of that statement saying almost like instead of just coming back and killing Strickland, she didn't do that? What do you think that's all about? Do you think that makes sense? Do you think that's a sensible thing to say, that that it would have made sense that she came back home? And do you think that that makes sense? Because I think David's missing the point. Kaitlin didn't know she would be caught. Kaitlin removed the bicycle from the scene, probably to make it look like a botched burglary. The bicycle removed from the scene was probably something like, you would imagine the bicycle's worth quite a lot of money. These elite athletes have got some really expensive equipment, right? And so someone came there to steal the bicycle, and that's the mask that's been put over the thing. That's why the bicycle was removed. And this is where I think it's really interesting. You're either going to say that I'm being completely ridiculous, or you're going to have a little bell go off in your mind, right? Maybe, just maybe, Kaitlin had been taking instruction from the Morphew case. Maybe she'd been paying attention to it. Maybe it had just come onto her radar here and then. Maybe certain people had spoken about it. Because let's face it, in the Morphew case, a bicycle was also staged. And where we are right now, someone appears to have gotten away with murder in the Morphew case. So in Kaitlin's mind, she may have thought, if I do something with the bicycle as well, it's going to throw people completely off, and it's just going to be so hard to figure this out, because that's apparently what happened in that case. So I'm also going to take a bicycle away and leave it somewhere, and it's going to throw people completely off, right? And that's all I'm going to need, right? If you're talking about intertextuality, Suzanne Morphew was a mountain biker. So very likely that story pinged on the radar of those gravel riding cycling people, right? That they may have noticed, wow, in other words, if they're reading about stories and they see that, you might click on it. You might take an interest in it. Remember, Kaitlin is also a cyclist. Her Facebook profile is a picture of her riding a mountain bike. And the Morphew case basically came to its current, this is the part that's really pertinent. The Morphew case basically came to its current who knows, who cares conclusion. In other words, something happened, someone disappeared, we don't really know, a bike was left there, but we don't really know what's happened. And that actually took place, this who knows, who cares conclusion took place on Good Morning America. Do you know when that was? As recently as 6th of May. The Barry Morphew and his daughters appeared on Good Morning America on the 6th of May. Guess when this crime took place? May 11th, just 5 days later. So is there a chance that some of the fabric of the Morphew case had been part of Kaitlin's consciousness? What do you guys think? So what Kaitlin didn't anticipate was CCTV footage and ballistics that seemed to put her at the scene. She didn't anticipate that. Like Chris Watts, she probably thought, without really thinking it through, that she simply wanted to protect her fairy tale. She simply desperately wanted to remove barriers to her living happily ever after with her Prince Charming. And she may have thought, so many people get away with things. I've seen so many people get away with things. In the terms of the Morphew case, it looks like someone may have gotten away with something. If you look at the John Benet Ramsey case, didn't someone get away with something? If you look at Kaylee Anthony, didn't someone get away with something? So why wouldn't she? If someone got away with something, why couldn't she get away with something? And so David goes on to say, we think we live in a world where we can see crazy on people's faces. Show up at a gas station and there's a guy there on drugs, and you think, that face has got crazy written on it. I'm going on to the next gas station. Then he goes on to say, I'm not trying to paint a picture, but if it was just jealousy, there'd be so many more jealousy deaths that we'd see every day. That's the scariest part about it. She bottled and suppressed it for so long that she went out and didn't act like this, end quote. So that's kind of an interesting argument, because he's kind of saying, don't tell me that this was jealousy, because they're jealous people all over the place. So why aren't we seeing this? And I think the answer is jealousy is a component here, But if you don't understand who this person is, then you don't understand how it works, and he doesn't understand who this person is. In other words, how does jealousy work with this person? Also, how jealous is this person? You don't just say jealousy is jealousy, it's the same thing here and there, right? The question is, what's the jealousy like with this person, right? So this is actually a useful insight from David because it acknowledges that there was another side to Kaitlin. He talks about where something was bottled up, where something was suppressed, and clearly something was suppressed. I don't think there's much mystery about that part either, because David himself says the following. Kaitlin always had goals she was after, and she always kept busy. The person I knew was trying to make her dream in this world, whatever that was. And that's also where you need to stop and say, no, not whatever it was. What was it? What was her dream? What was Caitlin's dream? And the impression I get from Kaitlin is that she was a very hard worker. She was also trying to be on par with Colin in the sense that she'd go cycling on tours with him, trying to keep up, even though she felt she was holding him back. Paddy Dunn says, have a few quid instead of a kudos. If it's not on Strava, it didn't happen. Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm on Strava myself, and I have to hit a certain amount of hours each month. It's just me competing against myself. And I think I'm going to reach my goal for this month. This was quite a tough month because I'm trying to come back from a rib injury. But hopefully next month will be easier, although it's going to be midwinter, and the month after that also midwinter. So we'll see. I still want to talk about Strava. I just haven't quite had the time to get on to deal with that. So it's not like whatever that was, what was Caitlin's dream? And as I say, she was working really hard to make herself acceptable to Colin, where he would feel, I want to go cycling with you, or, we can do things together, and, we are equal in a sense. But bear in mind, he's like this world-class athlete. That's a really tough assignment. And kudos to her, she was putting in an effort to try. And so if you go on to Colin's social media, there are photos of her cycling with Strickland and a small group of other riders in Iceland. You see her fully geared up, and she looks pretty strong. As an amateur rider, she looks pretty strong. It also looks quite hardcore. I mean, they in Iceland, looks really cold. They dress really warmly, and their bikes are sort of quite weighed down with, although it's pretty classy bikes, the bikes are quite weighed down with, not quite sure what it is. I don't know if it's tents or sleeping bags or what, but there's a certain amount of additional things on the bicycles. Now, besides the physical effort that Kaitlin was putting in, she was helping Strickland run various businesses and manage their accounts. And what I'm trying to convey to you guys is the effort and the investment that Caitlin's putting into making her fairy tale come true, right? The amount of time and pain and blood, sweat, and tears in several areas that she's spending on this relationship, only to have it squandered by a boyfriend. That's what it seems like, it feels like for her. So she's helping Strickland run various businesses. She's also helping to manage their accounts. And so I think what's been missed here is A, Caitlin's fairy tale. So like, what is her fairy tale? And B, what is Caitlin's investment in it? What is the scale of investment? What's the scope of it? How much is she investing? And the answer is a lot. It seems like she's investing a lot more than he is. I mentioned a few other cases earlier, and all of these include investments that in some shape or form become derailed by either the circumstances leading to the crime or they're simply part of the fabric. In the Ramsey case, the investment was in John's business, which had reached 1 billion in turnover. And you might say that investment is part of the fairy tale. And that's not an investment you want to lose. When you work that hard for that kind of thing, you built a business from scratch. You've worked in a basement on like Christmas morning, taking orders or whatever, and working. When you eventually build up a business, you don't want to just lose it. You don't want to just give it away. You don't want to let go of it. And so I think a lot of work went into that, with the McCanns both had scrabbled from working class roots to become doctors. In the Amanda Knox case, she'd invested a lot of hope and savings into a trip to Perugia. Now, that might not be a lot for most people. Ricardo Ortiz, thanks so much. Appreciate that. You might look at that and say, that's not a lot of money, but when you're a student, it is. When you've never traveled overseas and never really worked much, it is. It is an investment. It's also investments in other ways, things like you've invested your heart and your hopes, and you're invested in terms of where you're going to study. That's all an investment, and you don't want to lose it. In Scott Peterson's case, he and Lacey tried going into business, and they opened a sports bar called The Shack in San Luis Obispo, right? And that was their investment. But there was a point where Scott Peterson was struggling financially, and it was like, I don't want to work hard. I don't want to like work and kind of get nowhere. I don't want to fail. And so it's like, it's also that side of the story. I want the fairy tale. I don't know if I'm prepared to work for it again. I've already worked for it. I don't want to start again from scratch. Chris Watts, I think, also felt like he'd worked hard as a provider and a husband. And I don't know whether you dispute that. I don't know if you'd say he didn't work hard as a worker, as a mechanic. And I don't know if you would dispute that he worked hard as a husband. He did the laundry for his family. And you kind of got the feeling that he did quite a lot. And yet, despite all of that work, he found himself housebroke, month after month, repeatedly bankrupt, and he didn't like that. In all of these scenarios, a lot of work has gone into something. There's an investment in time and energy into a particular fairy tale. And when the nightmare lurks, they don't want to lose everything. They don't want to start over. Kaitlin didn't want to start over either. She was 34 years old, and she didn't want to start over. She didn't want all the work that she'd put into the relationship and into this life lost. And she saw Mo as an existential threat to everything she was trying to build with Strickland. And maybe she was right. Maybe Mo was an existential threat to that. Maybe eventually, especially if Colin became very successful and Mo became very successful, they could have become this super couple. They would have had enough money to be together and live happily ever after in their sporting happily ever after. And Kaitlin would be thrown or kicked to the side, right? So maybe she was right in fearing that, because the more successful he became, the better his chance of becoming financially independent. The more successful she became, the better the chance they had kind of as a couple, in a sense. So that brings us to this question. Remember, I asked, why has Strickland gone into hiding? Well, I think the answer is quite simple. Let me first just read what David said. He says, none of us can sleep. He's staying out of sight, meaning Colin is staying out of sight until she's caught, meaning until Kaitlin is caught. I do know where he is, but I'm not mentioning where for his safety. He's not in Texas. He's got completely out of Dodge, right? So why do you think Colin has disappeared? Why do you think Colin has disappeared? Pauline says, there's the fantasy too, though, if you take out the competition. Mondo says, go to Canada to get to Cuba. Interesting. LA Vibe says, some people can't talk about things or rationalize. She operated out of her amygdala. Okay. I think it's not absolutely like a reptilian response. I think that is part of it, that there's this mindless thing that is taking control, but I also don't think it's completely mindless. I think there's a certain amount of triggering that's taking place, but also a certain amount of backstories driving the process forward. I know what you did last summer. I know what you did the last time you were in Austin. I know that I've warned you and you didn't listen. I know that you won't stop, so I'm going to have to take control. You know what I mean? So all of that is part of there is some cognition taking place. Also, if there was no cognition, she wouldn't have been able to become a fugitive and stay away for as long as she has. She's able to think on her feet, I think. Bria says apparently he's scared of Kaitlin. I think that's a fair statement. Paddy says, I like Nick's way of drawing us in and challenging you to think about these situations. Thanks, Paddy. Debbie says, I think he should be making appeals to Kaitlin to turn herself in, but he won't. That's actually a pretty good point. I think if there's anyone who she will catch her attention in an announcement would be him. You know, I definitely think that's a really good suggestion. Good one, Debbie. Jeanette says, Kaitlin blames Colin for making her do the crime. He'd best be careful. Yeah, it would be interesting to think who she does blame. But this is the way that I see it. The reason why he's left the home is because I believe Kaitlin. I don't think Kaitlin was living with him. I don't think it was like a case of Kaitlin is living with him. I think it was he was living with her. It's her home. So if someone committed a murder, do you want to live in their home? I mean, the idea is that aren't they going to want to come home at some point? Might they want to come home? Might they want to sneak back home and pick up, a water bottle or something? So if someone committed murder and was out there somewhere, would you want to stay in their home? And they're still wanted. Who would? Who would want to live in their house? Who would want to sleep in that house? Who would be able to sleep in their house, right? So this hasn't, to me, been established. I don't know whether it's for sure is her home and he was staying with her in her home. I don't know whether it's his home and she's actually staying in his home, or whether it's like their home and they both sort of own it together. What I can tell you, which I think may somewhat address that question, she's a realtor. In the Scott Peterson case, Lacey's mother was a realtor, and that's how they got their home. In other words, the way that Scott and Lacey had a home in Modesto was kind of thanks to the fact that Lacey's mom was a realtor, and it wasn't like that was part of how they ended up getting a home, right? Anyway, so alongside, this is according to the Daily Mail, quote, alongside her work as a realtor, Kaitlin also owned 3 rental properties in Austin. She also helped out with a Wheelhouse Mobile, and according to David, said she could have retired at 34. She could have retired now if she wanted to. So what David's saying is she had a lot of money and a lot of resources based on owning 3 rental properties and and I guess her financial interest in a couple of other things. That tells me, so the conclusion I draw from that is that she's Mrs. Moneybags. And that's Colin's big incentive for trying to make it work, because she has money and he doesn't. Or she has a lot of money and he doesn't have as much, something like that. And there's certain things he wants to do. He wants to go on a cycling adventure in Iceland. Well, can he afford that? How much are his sponsors paying him? How much money does he need to spend on traveling to races? So the other thing could be that he does earn a certain income. Maybe it's quite a good income, but in his own mind, he doesn't feel like it's enough. And he wants to live a certain life with the best products and the best this and the best that. And so this is speculation, but if Kaitlin's problem was jealousy, maybe Colin's was something like wanting more than you have, if you know what I mean. Like like if you only have a certain amount of money and you can't afford something, how do you get something that you can't afford? Well, you get someone else to buy it for you, or somehow you cheat the system, right? He was cheating on Kaitlin, and I don't know whether he was cheating on Mo with Kaitlin, but it certainly seemed as though he was cheating on one of them. I suppose you could make the argument that he wasn't, that he was in a relationship with the one, and then he left the one, and then he was in a relationship with the other one. But certainly from Kaitlin's perspective, it felt like he was cheating on her. That must be what he thought, what she thought. And so the other side of it is, was he with Kaitlin because she was quite wealthy and maybe needed that, and maybe in the future he wouldn't need that? I don't know. It's speculation. Colin might be a really good guy and a really good-hearted guy, and the relationship with Kaitlin wasn't going to last much longer anyway. I don't know. But the fact is, he was living with Kaitlin when this happened. He wasn't living with Mo, right? It does make you think, just in a general sense, about society in a way. You say, when society is greedy, does society try and cheat to get what they want? When society is greedy, is greed a form of ambition, or is it something less good, wanting more than you deserve, right? Just think about it like that. And how might that apply here, or doesn't it apply? We're still trying to find out what's going on. We're still trying to get to know these people, and that's going to take time. The other thing is, Kaitlin did appear outwardly successful. She had a career as a yoga teacher, but that ended with the COVID-19 pandemic that ended in March 2020. She retrained as a realtor, and she was actually working at Sotheby's International Realty in Austin in December 2021. Now, I think that is also something that's maybe of interest to the US Marshals, is she's got training as a realtor. She's employed by Sotheby's. Could she not possibly try and get a position either in realty somewhere or through Sotheby's international agencies, right? Just something to consider, I guess. Teresa says, hi, Nick, Timmy, and Ivy. Thanks for that. I don't know where Timmy is. I think he's lying on my bed. I'll call him just before we go off. And that brings us to the final point here. Fairy tales are often born from nightmares. So this is where I really learned a lot in terms of this case. You start asking really basic questions like, where did Kaitlin's work ethic come from? And how or where was her identity forged? And you can ask these same questions about yourself. Where does your work ethic come from? Or God forbid, where does your lack of work ethic come from? Where does that driving force that you have come from? Or if you've lost it, what is the reason for it? How or where is anyone's identity forged? What makes you who you are? Is it I think, therefore I am, or what my mom told me, therefore I am, or what my dad told me, therefore I am, or I'm living in the shadow of this person, or whatever? How is your identity actually created? How much of it is created and is a creative process, and how much is just chemicals and predetermined? How much choice do you have in who you become? And as we see so often, I think true crime is a really good answer to those questions. Who someone is often invariably a calculus determined by family and by family dynamics. The family structure, the family dynamic creates who you are for the rest of your life. And you can maybe make a few changes here and there and a little bit of fine tuning, but it kind of sets you on your path, right? Let's just look at some of your questions. Julie says, good to see you here, Julie. Julie says, financial reliance can make someone stay in a relationship that they should really finish. That's a great point. And I think that is possibly part of the Brian-Gabby dynamic, that there's some financial reliance there. Was Gabby relying on Brian in kind of a financial sense? Hai says, is she, so she's not wanted. Who would hire her now if she is? No, well, that's obviously absolutely true. But you might find a Sotheby's in some obscure place like, I don't know, Portugal, Bulgaria, Iceland, I don't know. You might find a Sotheby's that's somewhere, and maybe the news hasn't reached there yet, or they don't speak English or something. I don't know. As far as I know, Kaitlin, in terms of the search warrant or in terms of the wanted thing, isn't she described as partly Hispanic? So I don't know if she can speak another language as well. That might also be something to look into. I wouldn't be surprised if she, she's got money and she's quite clever. How hard it would be to buy a passport or something off the black market. In other words, a fake passport, a fake identity. Once she does that, I don't know if they would really ever catch her again. But that also suggests she's got knowledge of like the criminal underworld, that she's very street smart in that sense. I don't know what the answer is to that. Spirit says, how would she access her finances while on the run and remain anonymous? Well, I think she could draw quite a big sum, and then, then she has it. That's an interesting question. I'm sure that they're monitoring some of her accounts. The question is, do they have all of her accounts? If she opened a brand new account tomorrow, would that ping on anyone's radar? In other words, when someone opened a brand new account, would people know that? I don't know. Also, maybe there's someone that would look out for her. Maybe she knows someone that no matter what would look out for her. I think that's a bit of a long shot, but who knows? Deborah says, I'm studying ethics, working towards my law ethics certificate. Okay. LA Vibes is quite difficult to stay off the grid in today's world. No, that's certainly true. That is certainly true. Which is why you want to go to certain places where there's not much of a grid, like Nepal, like maybe Indonesia. Right? There's certain places where there isn't too much of a grid. I remember, or I seem to remember, there was a moment where they thought Brian Laundrie had left the States, and wasn't one of the options South Africa, that he mentioned going to South Africa. Do you guys remember that? Margaret Zabinski says, are her parents around? I'm not sure. I'm going to get to that in a moment. Okay, so I just want to finish off on this. We almost at 2 hours. We had an hour, 40 minutes. So we're talking about identity. Where did Kaitlin's work ethic come from? And this is under the heading, fairy tales are often born from nightmares. And so what I'm trying to say is that didn't Kaitlin's fairy tale, the pursuit of it, wasn't that born in a nightmare? And what was that nightmare? The Charles Sobriety documentary, I haven't seen it. Did she have luggage at the airport? Not that I know of. So Kaitlin does have a sister, and they, I think, opened I'm not actually sure exactly what it was. I don't know if it was a yoga studio or something, but it was really popular, whatever it was. People were coming in, and there's a lot of things happening. And then, according to David, Kaitlin confided that their mother had been an alcoholic and she never wanted to be like her. And that suggests to me that her mother's no longer alive. If their mother had been an alcoholic, I think that means she's no longer alive. I also think that was the nightmare that she was trying to run away from, that her mother's an alcoholic, her mother's dependent, her mother's addicted, her mother is, I guess, quite dysfunctional in her life, and she doesn't want to be like her mother, and so she seems to overcompensate. She's really successful, really healthy, and trying to live this incredible life with this world-class athlete. And it's like, maybe you're trying a bit too hard. Maybe you're not a world-class athlete and you just need to be you, and that's okay. So I think Kaitlin being a health nut and financially successful is Caitlin's version of running away from her mother, or this idea of being anything like her mother. So she's actually running away from an idea, right? And what I think Kaitlin missed is this running away. In this running away, Kaitlin was actually just like her mother. So while her mother was running away through drinking, Kaitlin has been running away, I'm running away from the idea of becoming like you. And now she's running away again. So as I say, whether you drink to avoid reality or try to make enough money to cushion against reality, whether you fly to New York after doing something terrible, it's the same thing. It's running away. Can you face yourself? Can you face the situation? And you can kind of get the sense that she didn't want to, with what was happening with Mo, she didn't want to run away from what was happening. She wanted to face it. But it seems like she overfaced it. She was very confrontational and very much wanting to take control. But you can kind of see where that was coming from. I don't want to lose control. I don't want to lose what I've gotten because I've fought so hard to get here, and it can be lost. Apparently her brother, so she's got a sister, her brother struggled with drug abuse, and apparently she planned to bring him to work on the trailer business. So she was actually going to give her brother a helping hand. He's going to work, I guess, with David on these trailers, and she was kind of going to, help him on the path where he needed to go. So her mother and her brother were addicts of some sort, it looks like. An alcoholic and then a drug, someone using drugs a lot. David said that her brother was on a bad path and bad patterns with his decision making, and she was just trying to be there to be able to help. We were thinking about bringing him here so he could work on trailers and get out of the circle he had been in. If her brother's made bad decisions and on a bad path. One wonders whether if she had to call him up, would he help her? If she was about to help him now, right? Doesn't that mean she's helped him in the past? And if she's helped him in the past, would he help her now? That's, I definitely think, an interesting question. Also, what would her brother's relationship be with law enforcement? If law enforcement said, can you please work with us? Do you think he would want to? What would his past relationship possibly be with law enforcement? Just quite interesting to think about. So in conclusion, do you see now that within the context of her family, of Kaitlin's family, she actually built herself up? Think about the fact that her one sibling's, not made good decisions, is struggling in his life, probably not successful. And her mother, I don't know if her mother's even alive anymore, but she also struggled. And Kaitlin, in contrast, is this wonderful, glittering success story. But not only that, she's created this perfect exterior where she seems like this wonderful person. But meanwhile, underneath that is all of that insecurity, all of that fear, all of that brokenness. And it just doesn't go away. You can try and run away from it. You can put Band-Aids over it and put a happy smile over it, but that is part of who she was. And she was trying to manage her anxiety in this relationship that would make anyone anxious, which is, I can't keep this relationship together. It is starting to unravel. What can I possibly do, right? And so Kaitlin had come a really long way. She'd built herself up. She'd worked hard. She transcended her circumstances, only to be undone at this point by this idea of this younger woman who was clearly a threat to everything that she was and had been trying to build. That's what she saw, and that's how she saw it. And the question is, was she wrong? Was she wrong to see it that way? What do you guys think? Do you think she was wrong? I mean, in terms of how she saw her situation. Taking that a bit further, within the mythos of her life, was her sense of being threatened legitimate? What do you guys think? LA Vibe says, I just wish she would have had the confidence to leave him. Bria says, you guys will all love it. It's so bizarre and unlike anything we've heard before in terms of that. Okay, so that's what it's about. It's called The Serpent. True crime documentary. Well, Bria, are you guys talking about other stuff? Is it on Netflix? I'll check it out. What's the name on Netflix? What's the title on Netflix? Is it The Serpent? Debbie says a relationship was threatening, no doubt, could not face losing. Robbie Robbins says, we are listening too. Okay. So in my opinion, everything that she felt was completely rational, actually, and legitimate. The question is not that. The question is, what is the right response to those feelings? What's the right response to feeling desperate and feeling very, very anxious and feeling like I'm going to lose everything? What's the right response to that? I don't know what the right response is, but the wrong response is to pick up a gun. The wrong response is to say, there's a really complicated problem that I've got to deal with and I want to just shoot it down and that's going to solve the problem. Well, it's not, right? I think the way to address it is unfortunately the hard work of basically saying, you know what, if you love someone, set them free. This guy's obviously not that into me. You can't force it to work. Even if you did force it to work, it's not a genuine relationship. I really, it's easy to say this because we're not her. When you've invested so much in a relationship with someone, it's very hard to just go, okay, it's not working. But I guess what she needed to realize is I'm not going to be a pro rider ever. This guy's a pro rider, and if he wants a pro rider as a girlfriend, that's not going to be me, right? And so the other side that I think no one is talking about, even thinking about, is she's 34 years old. She's got to be thinking, if this relationship doesn't work out, I've got to meet somebody else. And I still want to have children. I don't know whether, maybe she didn't. Maybe, you know, if she was listening, she would kind of type a message, I do not want children. But if she did want children, she's running out of time. She's got to now meet somebody else. She's 34 years old, and she's got to meet someone who's got to somehow compare to this guy that she thinks is the perfect guy. And it's like the clock is ticking, and I don't know if I can do this. I don't know if I'm going to be able to do this in time. That puts a whole new dynamic of pressure, unbearable pressure, and the clock is ticking and makes the whole thing a lot more fraught, because you may not meet someone. And then what? Then you spend the rest of your life, well, maybe not single, but childless. And this fairy tale that you worked so hard right at the end just gets unraveled. And so you do want to, Robbie Robbins says, I felt my clock ticking, age 27. Cynthia says, rhetorical question, but why do women get so hung up on a guy who has a major issue or doesn't seem fully committed to you? I'd suck it up, get out, grieve, learn, find someone more compatible. I think part of that is quite a good question, is if in your backstory you've experienced rejection, if in your backstory you've struggled to get those close to you to love you, right? It might be a mother's love, it might be a father's love, it might be whatever. Then in your personal life, in your relationships, you kind of go after people who don't love you, and you try and get them to love you in order to deal. In other words, that relationship is actually a kind of voyeurism into your past, where you're dealing with your past through this whole idea of making yourself lovable to someone who seems to not completely approve of you. And so by winning the approval of someone, you get that sense of, oh, I am lovable. But you won't get that from someone who's like, I love you. You know, everything about you is perfect. So in other words, subconsciously, you want the situation where someone is not completely committed to you or not completely into you. And the challenge then is that you convince them that you are worth their time and worth their love and that you are deserving of it. And in other words, that it's resolving kind of an inner kind of angst from your past. In other words, your relationship with someone isn't necessarily your relationship with someone. It's symbolic of other relationships and other dynamics that have gone unresolved and that are carrying over into this relationship, if that makes sense. LA Vibe says, picking the type who rejected you in the past. Yeah. Okay, so that is my spiel. Hi says, at some point you need to let go. Yeah. So yeah, that's my spiel. I see we had about an hour, 54 minutes. I'm kind of in two minds about, do I do Van Gogh letters tomorrow, or do I do another Johnny Depp analysis? I kind of want to talk about the jurors. That's quite interesting as well, where they come from, what has been already said about them. Terry Dean says, Colin started this fire, at least stoked it. Shouldn't his character be scrutinized as well? How much longer of that character did he have at 35? It's true. We actually want to get to know all three of these people. That just, as I say, takes time. I think there are some obvious things you can say about Colin. You can say he's obviously extremely disciplined. He's obviously extremely focused. But that there's also a flip side to that. In other words, and I think the same goes with Mo as well, that you've got this incredible dedication, this incredible work ethic. This is in terms of sport, this incredible, training and being focused and so on. But then you're also a human being. You also want to have a little bit of fun. You also want what you want. So there are things that you are denied as an athlete. You can't eat ice cream whenever you want. You can't lay on the sofa and watch Johnny Depp trial all day. You've got to get up and train for 5 hours a day, whatever it is, whether the sun's shining or not, right? And so next to all of that self-discipline and self-sacrifice is that little thing of, what about me? What about what I want? What about I've got these strong feelings for that person? And you can call that a little bit of ill discipline. You can call that, like if you're on a diet and you don't eat certain things and then you have a cheat day, you could call that like a cheat day. That they are so disciplined that there's nevertheless this strong temptation to cheat. Sometimes that's how discipline works. Something that is absolutely taboo becomes this incredible fantasy. Let's say you may not eat ice cream while you're training for this particular race. Then ice cream becomes this incredible, just so want to have some ice cream, right? So it's almost like Adam and Eve. Guys, you can do whatever you like, but just one thing you mustn't do is eat from the tree of good and evil. So now suddenly that's what you have to do. That's what you want to do. There's one thing you can't have. Now you absolutely must have it, right? In other words, you have this scenario of, as I say, sacrifice. And then there's this one thing that you just feel like, I just want to make a little exception here. I just want to give myself this, right? LA Vibe says, great channel. Thanks a lot for that. Julie says, excellent coverage of this case here and on Patreon. Thanks for that. So I do want to still talk about Strava, just to let you guys know, just in a very basic sense, how Strava works. It depends on what sport you're doing, but generally, you might have a watch. It might also be a cycling sort of computer. And basically what happens is this is got GPS functionality. So it'll map your ride, it'll measure your ride, it'll measure the speed you're going, it'll measure the altitude, it'll measure how much you go up, how much you go down, how your pace varies, how your heart rate varies, how the temperature varies, all these different variables. And when you finish your workout, it'll automatically upload it to Strava, right? It might go through your phone, an app on your phone, but it automatically uploads to Strava. And then Strava is sort of a cloud. It's kind of like Facebook. And then there all your stats are together. And it's sort of aggregated. What is your fitness level for the month? What is the recommended next workout? You can also look at friends of yours that you're following. What workouts have they done? And you can give kudos to them. And you might say, wow, that's a great route. I want to do the same route that they've done. Someone who's done a race, you can look at their stats. You can see what watts they did, what the average speed was. And so you can kind of be inspired by another athlete, and you can also see how effective another person's training and either be inspired by it or copy it or just appreciate it. I follow someone on Strava who used to train for triathlon, and struggled a little bit. She was quite good, but she didn't quite make it. And then she transitioned from triathlon to becoming a professional cyclist. And she's recently left South Africa to train with a group of female riders in Switzerland. And it's quite weird seeing the maps of where she used to ride in South Africa. And now those maps are all over Switzerland. And yeah, so it's just really interesting following what some of your friends are doing. Some of them are running, some of them are swimming, some of them go somewhere for like a camp, a training camp. And in my case, I guess I surprised some of my followers, and I went and rode around Prince Albert, and like I'm in the middle of nowhere, I'm going through these mountains, and the next thing I broke my rib. And so I put a photo of my broken rib on Strava, and now it's like, how am I going to recover from this? What workouts am I going to do? This is my first workouts. This is my first swim since I broke my rib. This is the first mountain bike ride since I broke my rib. And obviously what I think people are worrying about now is the confidentiality and privacy of Strava. I must tell you, when I used it, if I went on holiday or if I used it wherever, I was sort of conscious about the security aspect of it. And the thought did cross my mind that something like exactly what has happened now could happen, and now it has happened. So I would expect Strava to kind of add a security layer. I know that you can, first of all, you can set your profile to private, but Mo had like 1,000 followers. As soon as you've got 1,000 followers, you can have someone following you who you don't really know, right? That's one problem. The other one is that you can set Strava that it, for example, when you start your workout, that the first 4 or 5 kilometers are sort of fuzzy. It doesn't really show where you are. And that is one of the features Strava does have. I do want to, someone said, yeah, that shouldn't we really be getting to know, thanks, Teresa, wow, beautiful mind. Shouldn't we be getting to know Colin? We do get to know him pretty well through his social media. We can see he's a very successful athlete, a very determined athlete. Maybe some of that success was going to his head, like with Oscar Pistorius, that you become this star and you feel that you are entitled to more than when you were not such a big star. Who knows? So the social media is definitely one of the things you want to look at. And yeah, we'll, obviously see what comes out over the course of the next few days and weeks. I also think we need to get to know Mo. There's quite a lot of material on her interview she's given. Her backstory is also quite interesting, how she grew up in Vermont, where there's a lot of skiing in winter, and then in summer, those ski slopes make really incredible downhill, like downhill racing. So she obviously was a courageous, tough person as well. And Colin Strickland really admired her. Even the police said that he really had a lot of admiration for her. And one athlete admiring another athlete, that's genuine. That's like, that's real. And if she admired him, and I'm sure she did, it is quite hard to compete with that, and it's quite hard to know what to do with that, right? Lisa McGuire says, absolutely, Nick, regardless of whether she knew she wanted children or not, biology does drive us in our 30s. I made a couple of mistakes in that age range for that very reason. Paddy says, Kaitlin could use the flyby function to see both Colin and Mo. Always set the privacy setting when you rock up in a different location, even if it's for a few days. Yeah. Okay, so we passed 2 hours. That was kind of my not my goal, but benchmark, I guess. I'm really hoping that this case is going to gain traction with probably not you guys because you're already here, but a little bit with the rest of YouTube. I think it's necessary that we look at some of the characters in true crime that you don't often see, which is sporty people. These are very different characters than what we're quite used to. There's a little bit of what you're talking about here in the Morphew case, where they were quite fit people and were quite sporty. But this is definitely interesting, and it's a very different world in a way. And each person in the story is actually really interesting. Mo is very interesting. It is very tragic what's happened to her. You can see she was very much loved by her community. Colin is respected in a totally different way. He'd also achieved a lot. And then Kaitlin had her own journey that was heroic until a certain point. Her journey was she escaped her circumstances, and it was quite heroic until a certain point. So, what were the other things that happened? Someone says major Oscar Pistorius vibes. Hi says, thank you for allowing me to listen in. Okay. Rebecca Haley says, thanks, Nick. I hope it gains traction too. Greetings from sunny Queensland, Australia. Some of the people I've spoken to have heard about it, people that are sort of sporty people. I just don't know whether too many sporty people have the time or the interest the way the folks in true crime do in true crime. And also, I don't know whether the true crime community are that interested in the sporty side of things. Like one's got to wonder, why did the Vicky White case gain so much traction? Was it because Vicky White is accessible and identifiable and Kaitlin kind of isn't? What's the difference? Just something to food for thought kind of thing. Hey, Jealousy says, a yogi would never kill. Darkness Exposed says, wow, you're still alive. Awesome. Well, I'm about to say goodbye. This little guy wants to sleep. Okay. Any of you here seen Top Gun? Any of you watched that? Julie says, thank you, hey. Thank you, Julie. Julie, it's time for bed, eh? 1 o'clock in the morning. Well, 11 o'clock at night, I think, in the UK. As this says, if she is watching, what would you say to her? I think I would say this could all end a lot worse than it is right now. Look at what happened to Vicky White. The right thing to do here is to turn yourself in, and the right thing to do here is to account for what has happened. It's the hard thing to do, but it's the right thing to do. And the alternative to that could be that the same thing that happened to Vicky White, that could actually happen. That's kind of what I would say. Spirit of 1776 says lots of mention about monies Vicky had with her, but what monies is known about Kaitlin? Yeah, we don't know too much about that, except that she had quite a lot of money. I think she had a lot more money than Vicky had. Judy says no, because that would involve watching Tom Cruise. Okay. Hey, Jealousy says she can teach in prison. Those folks would be kind. Yeah. Paddy Dunn says gone midnight here. Okay, guys. Thanks to the mods, Bria. Bria, is it only you? Jean Karras as well. I think someone else was here as well. Maybe. Are there no other mods here still? Okay. Well, anyway, Jean and Bria, thanks a lot for moderating. Thanks to all the members as well, and those folks on Patreon. Oh, Sharon as well. Yeah. Thanks, Sharon. And then thanks for the super chats. Really appreciate it. I must have been quite happy that, although some people might say 200 isn't a lot, I thought for this particular case, which is still quite unknown, I thought it was quite a good showing. So thanks, guys, for showing up. Obviously, a lot is still going to happen in this case. As I say, getting to know these people, but also Kaitlin's journey. Wherever Kaitlin is, it's like a developing story. And I've got an idea it's going to be a lot more to this than the Vicky White saga. I think law enforcement have kind of got their work cut out for them, but we'll see. Bria says, thanks so much, Nick, and for everyone being here. Bria, thank you. Have a good night have a good sleep in France, Bria. And Bria is also actually quite sporty, by the way. Zenaida says hi. Well, hi and bye. So yeah, and all the guys who've newly subscribed, good to have you guys here. And watch this space. There'll be quite a lot of content on this. I'm on the case, so watch this space. I do want to deal with the social media, and I'm just trying to think what the other thing was. Strava as well, but Colin's social media also Mo's, and then getting to know Mo through just her backstory. There's a very interesting backstory of her family being sporty and how she got to where she got to. So I think we've gotten to know Kaitlin quite well. We now need to get to know Colin and Mo a lot better. So I think that's where the direction we'll go into next. Judy says, I'm not familiar with this case, but always good to see you. Hope you're feeling better and recovered from your injuries. I'm kind of getting there. This month was a recovery month. Next month, the hard work is going to begin. And it's like through the middle of winter, so it's going to be tough. But hopefully I'm ready. Jean says, glad you're on this case. Thank you. Thank you. Guys, thanks a lot. Take care, and I'll see some of you guys tomorrow. And so until then, all the best. Okay.